What's going on, y'all? I wanted to kick off the new year starting to provide a little bit more visual accountability of what I'm doing and some of the projects that I work on. I wanted to kick it off with one of the projects that I've been working on for the longest period of time, and that is Render Engine. Render Engine is the static site generator that I've been working on for about 4 years now. I still don't believe it's production ready, don't worry. I'm not gonna tell you there's a new static site generator out on the scenes or anything, but I've been mostly doing this as a way to level up my Python skills and learn how to maintain larger projects. Over the last several years, I've used that to learn new concepts in the Python space. I started a podcast with a friend of mine named John Bonifato called Python Community News. Now, that website, just like all of my other static sites that I have, runs Render Engine. And showing John this static site generator and how to use it, he liked it too. And when you have someone other than you using your stuff, that means you have to think about it differently. One of the things that came with that was actually bringing back an old style of route generation that I had from early stages of development that I had taken out because it was kind of slow. And that was building a route list, which means that the site builds out every single page before writing it to disk. And if you don't have a lot of memory, that can be a problem. If you have a lot of pages, that can be a problem. And ultimately, I took that out because I wanted it to be reliable and faster, to be honest. One of the things that I had to do because of some of the companies that I work for was support older versions of Python, because I wanted to use Render Engine in examples that I was using for work. And if a site had to run Python 3.8, then I had to make sure that Render Engine worked with 3.8. That's no longer the case. Now I can actually bump up the minimum requirement for Render Engine to Python 3.10, which has a lot of efficiency improvements. And I can also start testing it with 3.11. It runs with 3.11, but the minimum support is 3.10. So that meant that now I could actually go back and do some of those things that were slightly inefficient. And it was important to do that because that allowed for the ability to reference pages within other pages. So doing that and bringing back that fundamental change did kind of a good thing and a bad thing. It added for the ability to have a little bit more flexibility in how I rendered those pages, but it also broke how a lot of the site worked. In that moment, the thing that I really needed was new tests. We started adding these tests in, and there's still plenty of tests to go. I think there's only like 30 tests currently. But I also started wanting to work on the documentation, which right now we're using MakeDocs. My eventual goal is to provide theme and extension support and let Render Engine be the source of documentation as well. So the site is documented using the engine that built the site, or that it talks about. I'm still a long way away from that. But in order to get there, we had to start thinking about this other piece, which was extensibility. Social media right now is all over the place, and I wasn't really sure what that meant. But what I decided ultimately was that my website should be the central hub of all the things that I'm doing. And I don't necessarily want to be in the business of recreating things just to make sure that they live on my website. So this created this idea called custom parsers. A custom parser is basically just taking that markdown and front matter spec, ripping it out of Render Engine, and then allowing other types of parsers to be swapped in and out. Now, the base parser now, for the first time ever, is no longer markdown, it's just HTML. So if you have HTML going in, it takes HTML going out. Obviously, most people aren't going to use that. You can add the markdown parser relatively easily. It's just an import and then add into the parser or the page parser. But I also started working on other parsers, like one that uses JSON and one that uses RSS. And I even have a specific version of that called a podcast page parser, which will allow me to just put in the URL of all the podcasts that I do, and it creates pages. People can go to one place, my website, and eventually they will be able to see everything that I'm doing, and it's still just a couple of lines of code. I think I've added maybe 6 lines to my what was 25 lines of code that generates my site, excluding the several hundred lines of code that Render Engine is. That's kind of where I am now, and I wanted to kind of give people that update at the beginning of the year. If you want to learn more about this project, I'll have a link to the GitHub repo in the description as well as the documentation. If you want more content like this, if you want to learn more about some of the projects that I'm working on, maybe some that I work on at Microsoft for work, or some that I'm working on in my own personal spare time, let me know in the comments below, and be sure to give a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. But until next time, I'll see you later.